Well, good morning. The topic for today, really in a word, is motivation. Until now, the Alter Rebbe has described to us exactly who we are and what is expected of us. And the Alter Rebbe has told us that we were created with the capacity to fulfill our highest and greatest potential. What is our highest and greatest potential? To never stray from the Torah's optimal path. Not in thought, not in speech, and certainly not in action. Well, that's the story. And that subject that Alter Rebbe covered in the first 15 chapters of Tanya. Now, the Alter Rebbe, having concluded the main objective of the Sefer Likutei Amorim Tanya, Sefer Shel Beinanim, the primary objective is to tell those Hasidim that used to come and say, Rebbe, I'm so frustrated. I work hard. I pray to Hashem. I attend minyanim. I attend classes. I immerse myself in the mikveh daily, which is an extreme level of piety. I give extra tzedakah. I do everything that I can. And I don't feel any more pious. I don't feel any relief from the impulses that drive me away from Hashem. I was hoping that if I purified my behavior, if I purified my conduct, it would have some effect on the purification of my mind and my heart, and I don't see that. Rebbe, what's wrong with me? And so in answer to that question, the Alter Rebbe composed the first 15 chapters of Tanya, saying to each of us who struggle with this frustration, that was never your job. You were never meant to still the voice that keeps calling out to you in your head from the left side of your heart. Rather, your job is to wrestle and to emerge victorious on a consistent basis. That is your job. You are a Beinani. You are an average human being, a regular human being, or like they say in English, a human being. You are a human being. And that means that you have these two poles that are schlepping you in opposite directions, and your job is to find the Torah's path and choose it in thought, speech, and action in every moment. So, once upon a time, as a young man with a big head, at the age of 20, maybe 21, I sat at a Farbrengen and we listened to the words of my friend and colleague, Rabbi Yaakov. Now he's in Miami, he sells insurance, but a very learned man, a very devoted chassid. And he was saying to the yeshiva boys, you have to find motivation. You have to find inspiration. You have to be inspired. And I said, inspiration, motivation, feh, Kabbalah soil, obedience, that's the name of the game. Inspiration, motivation seems so self-serving. Boy, oh boy, was I wrong. Unbelievably wrong. Because the whole thrust of Chabad is use your mind to find a reason to keep on going. What is the reason to keep on going? The reason to keep on fighting, the good fight of serving Hashem, to be, like in the words of the Alter Rebbe from the previous chapter, to be an Oived Elikim, one who fights to serve Hashem, as opposed to an Eved Hashem, one who just falls back on good habits of serving Hashem. The motivation to keep on fighting will be the product of your worldview, of your mental perspective. The more we train our mind to perceive the world as a product and an extension and a revelation of God's will, the more we train ourselves, our hearts, to appreciate the kindness, the beneficence, and the generosity of our Creator, the more we will be motivated to draw close to Him through a pristine and optimized physical and spiritual life. We'll be driven to do it. We won't be dragging ourselves to the rink for each and every bout. We'll be driven to do it. My old friend, Rabbi Menachem Feldman, teaches Tanya on YouTube. And I hope that by bringing him up, I don't lose any students to him. But he is a fantastic teacher. He mentions the analogy of a diet. Yeah. If you're mentally struggling against the notion, if you don't love the outcome, which is months away, then in English, that means you're not motivated well enough to carry through, to follow through. You need the motivation to be able to stay in the fight. And that is what Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, that is what he meant when he said, to serve Hashem in your mind, meaning your thoughts, your heart, meaning your thoughts, in your thoughts and feelings, in your mouth, meaning your words, and to do them, meaning your actions. It's very, very near to you. How could it be very, very near to you? Well, if you're motivated the right way, if you're putting in the right fuel, it truly is very near to you. You will be drawn to it. You wouldn't be dragging yourself into the rink for every bout with the Yetzer Hara. I have to daven now. I'm dragging myself with iron chains to go daven. If a person was motivated, if a person was putting in the right fuel and enough of it, they would be drawn to it. You have to keep Shabbos now. Same thing. If you were motivated, if you had the right fuel and enough of it, you would be drawn to it. You'd be pulled to observe Shabbos to the highest level. I have to avoid those things that are so fun. Well, same issue. There are things out there in the world that are easy fun, easy, meaningless fun. And we're very drawn to them because of their accessibility and because of how it gets our inner chemicals flowing. But if we really had the right fuel, if we really were pulled to draw close to Hashem, we wouldn't drag ourselves through the wrestling match with our Yetzer Hara to avoid those negative things. We would be drawn to the right decision, and it really would be very close to us. Quick question. Can you hear me okay? Because of the new location, I wonder if the sound is better or the same. Same. Okay. Now, Rabbi Tully Silverberg, also a great teacher of Tanya on YouTube. We could have like a whole YouTube Tanya Academy. Somebody ought to put that together. That'd be nice. Rabbi Tully Silverberg on YouTube teaches from the example of the world. He brings an example from the world of recovery. In the world of recovery, they have a phrase called white knuckling it. A person has a vice, and all of us have vices, some to the level of addictions and some just regular, where your brain is saying, don't do it, it's not good for you, and your hands and your feet just don't listen. You do it anyway. And so a person makes a decision not to follow those vices and not to fall into that same pattern again. But their heart's not in it. If the heart's not in it, you say, well, I'm just going to avoid it. And every time the temptation arises, I'm just going to white knuckle it. Meaning I'm going to hang on for dear life to my decision not to follow that path. The estimated success is a day, maybe two. A week is already a great success, and months, the likelihood of keeping on with that kind of effort for months is very unlikely. Rather, you have to go through the process of developing a good heart and developing healing thoughts. You have to change your thought process. He also gives the analogy of New Year's resolutions. Why is it that people almost expect their New Year's resolutions not to work? Why? Because what does it mean, a New Year's resolution? Till now, I've had a pattern of behavior that draws me in a negative path. But from now on, I'm not following that pattern. So the Alter Rebbe will say to you, why should you expect that that's going to work? You are the same person, you're not changed, not internally and not externally. If you're exactly the same person, that means that all the data is the same. All the processes that go on in your mind and in your heart, they're the same. Nothing's changed. Why should the outcome, meaning the behavior that results from your thoughts and feelings, why should they change? Rather, we have to change the way that we perceive. We have to change the way that we view the world, our role in the world, God's role in our lives, the purpose for which we were created, and the impact that every event that we see, hear, and experience has on that purpose, on ourselves, on our lives, etc., etc. We have to learn. We have to teach ourselves to view the world from the Torah's lens, because then it truly is very near to each and every one of us to follow the Torah's path, because we will be so drawn to it. That's the magic of Chabad. And that's why Chabad is called the Chabad system of Hasidus. Hasidus means serve God with your heart, not just with your hands and feet, not just obedience. And that's all of Hasidus. That's the Polish Hasidus and the Galician Hasidus and the Hungarian Hasidus and the Polish Hasidus and the Russian Hasidus. They're all following the Baal Shem Tov's dictum of Rachmana Liba Boi. Hashem wants your heart, not just your behavior. He wants your behavior, of course. He wants you to have good behavior. But Hashem wants your heart. Hashem wants that those that serve him, their hearts should be in it. But there are different approaches of how to get there. All the other groups, we call them Chagas Chasidus, meaning they attack love of Hashem directly from the heart. Stories, songs, holy experiences. But the Chabad system of Hasidus is specifically to follow this route. Develop your mindset, adjust and mature your mindset so that your eyes will see through a matured and purified lens of Torah, of Hasidus, and of God's will. And then it really is near to you. It really is profoundly impactful on the way you feel and perceive and the way you interact with your surroundings. In modern language, this is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And this also I'm borrowing from Rabbi Silverberg. Cognitive behavioral therapy means you have a behavioral flaw or an emotional flaw, but the way that you're going to solve it is through your mind. The way that you're going to correct that flaw is through your mind. Train your thought process to do a better job, a more truthful job, a more objective job, and the flaw will go away. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. If you change the T for a D, it says Chabad. So here in chapter 16, the Alter Rebbe introduces us human beings, whom the Alter Rebbe calls Beinani, to the method, the Alter Rebbe's cognitive behavioral therapy. Change your mind, you'll change your life. How are we going to do it? Let's see. Chapter 16. Erik Tes Zayin. If you have a copy of the Tanya in front of you, you can find chapter 16, Erik Tes Zayin, on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, or 42 in the English numbers. V'zeh klal godel, this is a great general principle, ba'avodas Hashem, in how we are going to succeed in serving Hashem, lebeinanim, for human beings, for regular human beings. Regular human beings who are driven to serve Hashem. Regular human beings who have decided to optimize their lives according to Torah's guidance. This is a general principle. Why is he called a general principle? Why isn't it called a mitzvah? Klal Godel means this, what I'm telling you now, will give rise to all the other good things. It's a basic principle. It's the foundation of your success. How does it become a foundation? What's the difference between this bit of advice and all the other advice that the Alter Rebbe has given before? The answer is, if you follow this advice, then all of the success we described previously, it follows automatically. If you only follow the advice that was given previously, each and every stage becomes a new fight, becomes a new bout. And to borrow the language we used earlier, you have to drag yourself into the rink again and again and again. And for a while, that's sustainable. For a while, you can do that. But that's only for starters. Once you have made the decision, so for the first day or two, or for the first week or two, or for the first month or two, you can white knuckle it. Fight every day, every moment, to do the right thing, to think the right thing, and to say the right thing. But eventually that's going to become exhausting. Instead, what the Alter Rebbe says, during those same days, weeks, and months, when you are, so to speak, white knuckling it, when you are hanging on by sheer willpower, you should be filling your tank with motivation fuel. You should be filling your mind with the right kind of motivation to carry you through the rest of the fights with a good strong wind in your sails, with a good strong head of steam, where all of the fighting becomes basically one fight. Stay motivated to love Hashem. That is a great principle in how a Beinani is going to succeed in optimizing his life according to Torah's guidance. Ha'ikir, the foundation is, hu limshoil, is to dominate, velishloit, and to rule over, al hateva shebecholol hasmali. The objective of this principle is to gain control of and to rule over the nature of your body, which comes to you courtesy of the left side of your heart. Al yedei oir Hashem hameir lanefesh ha'elekis shebemoyach, via using the power of that special light of Hashem that shines in your mind. We were told in chapter 14, chapter 13 maybe, that Hashem has blessed the human being with a natural power where the mind rules over the heart. What does it mean that the mind rules over the heart? We learned two options. Option number one of the mind ruling over the heart is that if your mind and your heart are arguing with each other, You have the power that your mind's decision should overcome your heart's impulse. For example, sometimes you're teaching a class and a good friend walks in the room and your heart is screaming at you, run away from your class and go and greet your good friend whom you haven't seen in a while. But your brain says that's not right. So there's an argument. So what should you do? Well, Hashem gave us the nature that your mind can control your heart. That when they have an argument, your mind can seize control of the body's functions and the heart will be left unfulfilled. That's the nature, the way that Hashem created human beings. Another more perhaps practical example, you're in a conversation with somebody who matters to you. If it's somebody that's a stranger, so generally this is not such a hard fight because we are very well accustomed to treating strangers well. But when it comes to somebody close to you, when it comes to somebody who's dear to you and near to you, then sometimes your heart runs away with you and you're feeling frustrated and you feel that because you're so close, you have a license to express your heart's feelings in exactly the language that your heart chooses. And you're about to fire off some very choice and rich, colorful words from a repertoire that we like to refer to as French. That's what your heart wants to do. But your mind says that's not right. So your heart and your mind are having a debate, and each one is vying for control over your mouth. Hashem has created us with a power that the brain can seize control and leave the heart unfulfilled. That is one way of understanding how Hashem created us where the mind can control the heart. But there's another way. The mind controls the heart means, practically, the heart only feels what it feels based on the perception, based on how information is processed through the mind. If you are trained to see everything in the world as the fulfillment of Hashem's will and nothing else, then your heart won't feel fear, your heart won't feel despair, your heart won't feel frustration, your heart won't feel sadness unless it's warranted by the Torah. Your heart won't feel despondency and hopelessness because your heart only feels based on how the mind perceives. That's a better way of understanding, a deeper way of understanding, and a more basic and fundamental way of understanding how the mind controls and rules over the heart. The heart responds to data, the heart responds to events in the world through the mind's prism. If we train our minds, our hearts become much healthier. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe here in chapter 16, if you want to gain control over your mind, if you want to gain control over your heart, meaning if you want to feel driven and you want to feel drawn to love Hashem, and loving is a feature of the heart, it has to start in your mind. Change your mind, you'll change your heart. When he contemplates or meditates, or he spends time thinking in his mind, begedulas ein sof baruch hu, about the greatness of Hashem, and greatness is understood in Chassidus also as kindness. It's understood throughout Judaism as kindness. When we say in the davening a quote from David HaMelech in the prayer that he uttered when Hashem allowed him to I don't remember when it was. It's in the paragraph Vayevarech David that David, in the presence of all the people, blessed Hashem, and he said, "Lecho Hashem, to you, O God, is Hagidula, greatness, v'Hagvura, and might, v'Hatiferes, and the beauty, v'Hahoid, and splendor. And victory and hoid splendor. Ki choil b'shamayim uva'aretz, that's yesod. Cho Hashem hamamlocha, that's royalty. So everything seems familiar. We have gevura, tiferes, netzach, hoid. Yesod is couched in some technical terms, and then mamlocha, malchus. The one that's foreign to us is gedula. That's not on the chart. Gedula? What's gedula? And the answer is gedula is synonymous with chesed. Because it goes chesed, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hoid, so on. And in the prayer from David, it went gedula, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hoid, and so on. So in this case, gedula, greatness, is synonymous with chesed, kindness. Take some time in your mind and contemplate the kindness of Hashem, the magnanimity of Hashem, the beauty of Hashem's creation, the magnitude of Hashem's creation. And how Hashem did all this just for you. As it's explained in many places in Hasidus, the exact order and cycle of this meditation. Contemplate the greatness of Hashem, lehoilid mibinosoi, so that from your understanding you will be able to bring out ruach das, a feeling of connectedness called das, v'yiras Hashem, and fear of Hashem b'moichoi, in your mind. Reverence of Hashem in your mind. It's not a feeling of fear, but it is a realization, an awesome realization of the grandness of Hashem, where you conclude that Hashem is worthy of being revered. Lihiyos, and the goal of this meditation and the resulting decision in your mind that Hashem is worthy of being revered and respected, treated with awe and respect. Now I'm repeating myself. The purpose of that is lihiyasur meira, to drive you, to motivate you to avoid evil, and evil could come in a de'oraisa form, in a biblical form, things that the Torah biblically told us we shall not do, u'derabanan, or whether they are things that the rabbis told us not to do. And the rabbis told us for several reasons things that we should not do. Number one, for communal integrity, the rabbis made Jewish community policy, as well as buffers around the Torah's prohibitions, the rabbis fulfilling the Torah's dictate, shmartem es mishmarti, protect my prohibitions, guard my prohibitions. The Chachamim, wherever there's a great risk of transgressing a biblical prohibition, the Chachamim put in a buffer. Meaning, for example, Torah says don't write on Shabbos, and the Chachamim said don't handle a pencil. Chachamim said don't build on Shabbos, the Chachamim said don't handle a hammer. And similar things. Boundaries, additional boundaries to keep us away from transgressing biblical prohibitions. But once the Chachamim enacted that decree, that becomes, from the Torah's view, from Hashem's view, the transgression of a rabbinic decree is as evil, if not worse, than the transgression of a biblical decree. Exactly why is a discussion for another time. In fact, we did discuss it another time, and you can see it on our YouTube channel under the playlist called Tanya Clips, of how rabbinic decrees become elevated to a biblical standard, or how they actually transform the world into conformity with their decrees. You can look that up on our YouTube channel, chabadcieli.com. Chabadcieli, I don't know how to do it, but on the Tiny Clips playlist. Va'afilu isur kal shel divreihem chas v'shalom. Even it will drive you, you'll be so driven reverence, a decision that Hashem is worthy of being revered, is so powerful. The motivation to do the right thing is so strong that if you can develop such a concrete decision in your mind that Hashem is worthy of being feared, that will bring about automatically a tremendous carefulness. That's not the right word. What's the right word for this? Carefulness? I don't know. But to avoid transgressing any of the biblical commandments, things that Torah says you shall not do, as well as the buffers that the Chachamim set into place, and even the those communal decrees, those decrees that the Chachamim made for communal integrity, we will be drawn naturally to obey them and not to transgress them. Some examples of the decrees that the Chachamim made for communal integrity is don't eat bread that was not prepared by a Jew, because communities are built over bread. And if we want to maintain the communal integrity of the Jewish people, that the Jewish people should be that we should be a nation apart from the world around us. We want to keep the Jewish community intact and not have a lot of influence and not have a lot of infiltration from the world around us and into the world around us. Breaking bread together is a huge gateway. And when the Chachamim saw this, they made this decree: do not eat bread that was not prepared by a Jew. Do not drink wine that has been handled by a non-Jew. That's for reasons of Avodah Zarah, but in addition, it has the implications of communal integrity. Daniel the prophet tried to institute a prohibition against using oil belonging to a non-Jew, but that one didn't stick, and so we let it go. That's the way rabbinic decrees work. If the Chachamim make a decree and the community accepts it, then it becomes a part of Torah. If the Chachamim make a decree and the community rejects it, well, then it is rejected. Of course, once it has been accepted, there's no going back, even generations and generations later. So therefore, we're talking about things that are seen often as minor rabbinic decrees, minor rabbinic prohibitions. But when a person is so motivated to maintain a pristine and optimized life for the presence of Hashem to rest within his mind and within his heart, and certainly to be expressed in his behavior, in thought, speech, and action, he will be so driven that he will observe even the most minor of the decrees of the Chachamim, and it will be very close to him. That is in terms of the prohibitions of Torah. But also the other side of the coin, the Yahavas Hashem beliboy bechalal hayimani, also the result will be that he will feel a spark of love in his heart, a real emotional, a real visceral love and yearning for closeness with Hashem, bachashika, with desire, vachafitza, and yearning, ledavka boy, to cleave to Hashem. And how does a person cleave to Hashem? Bekiyum hamitzvos, by fulfilling the mandates of Torah, by doing those things that Torah says do. The Oraisa, whether those commandments are from the Torah itself, biblical, or the Rabbanon, or whether those commandments are rabbinic in nature. For example, hand washing is a rabbinic decree. Candle lighting is a rabbinic decree. Brachas before food is a rabbinic decree. But you see how well accepted they are in Jewish practice. You say, wow, it's hard to tell the difference in practice, what's biblical and what's rabbinical. But really, it doesn't matter, Really, it matters only when serving Hashem in practice becomes complicated. If, God forbid, a person is subjected to some illness, or if, God forbid, a person is subjected to some a difficult living situation where fulfilling all the mitzvahs becomes difficult, then it matters if we're dealing with a biblical or a rabbinical decree, a biblical or a rabbinical commandment, because we have to be more careful with the biblical than we do with the rabbinical. Or, for example, when two mitzvahs butt up against each other, the biblical will come before the rabbinical, and so on. But generally, in the normal day-to-day life of a person, if you are drawn to serve Hashem, if you are drawn to cleave and connect yourself to Hashem, because your mindset is so appreciative, your mindset is so open wide to the kindness of Hashem, to the greatness of Hashem, to the value of closeness with Hashem, then you will be scrupulous in observing all of those commandments and all of the decrees, whether they be biblical or rabbinical. We're still talking about a Beinoni. We're still talking about regular people. How do you know we're still talking about regular people? Remember, in describing the highest level of Beinoni, or describing the level of tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe described how the love for Hashem that is present in the right side of the heart overflows the right side, the right ventricle, and spills over into the left ventricle, pushing out all the interests of the animal soul. That is not what the Alter Rebbe is describing here. What the Alter Rebbe is describing here is love of Hashem and yearning and desire that lives in the right side of the heart. Right next door to that is the left side of the heart, and therein lives the Yetzer Hara with its inclinations. Says the Alter Rebbe, but if you'll fill the right side of your heart with good interests, love and yearning, and your mind and your heart are now teamed up together, you're unstoppable. When your mind and your heart are working in harmony towards one goal, what could stop you? What should prevent you from fulfilling your wish of cleaving and connecting to Hashem? If your mind and your heart are suffering a disconnect because your mind wants to serve Hashem because you have some appreciation for Him, but your heart is busy with worldly affairs such as ice cream and donuts and other such wonderful worldly delights, well, then you're going to have a wrestling match every time it comes to act or say or think. The objective of this first approach that the Alter Rebbe describes here, the objective is to unify your heart and your mind together by engaging the power of your mind over your heart. Make the mind appreciate greatly the kindness of Hashem. Make the mind appreciate, have a profound appreciation of the generosity that Hashem has, the greatness of Hashem, by studying His creation, by studying His kindness, and so on and so forth. And by meditating deeply and longly on the greatness of Hashem, you can bring your heart and mind into concert with each other. After this story comes from the Sefer HaSichos from the previous Rebbe. Sefer HaSichos from the previous Rebbe is a collection of the Farbrengens that the previous Rebbe had. Most of the talks are at holiday meals, Shabbos meals, and a lot of the time is spent recounting tales of Hasidim, tales of Rebbes, some Divrei Torah, but most of the Divrei Torah were left for Shabbos in a formal setting, in a Maimer. Here, in a Sicha, in a casual talk, from the year 1930, 1931. The previous Rebbe shares the following episode. They used to call one of the Talmidim, one of the Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe, Rebbe Eliyahu Ber, the deaf one, the deaf mute, even though he was perfectly able to hear. Why did they call him that? Because once upon a time, he heard a Maimer Chasidus from the Tzemach Tzedek that dealt with the question of ruling over your body. And among the things that the Tzemach Tzedek discussed was Lashon Hara and Rechilus, meaning speaking bad about people or peddling tales about people. That ein tzrichim lishmoya bechlal, that these are things that the body does not need to hear at all. The Rebbe's words had such a profound effect on him that when people around this Rebbe Eliyahu Ber would begin to speak Lashon Hara or Rechilus, he simply did not hear them. His ears simply refused to hear them. This story comes to you from Likutei Diburim, also composed by the previous Rebbe, a collection of talks. The Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, once asked his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, in a Yechidus, what is the point of Chabad Chasidus? What's the goal? So the Alter Rebbe answered him, the whole goal of Chasidus Chabad is to change the nature of one's character. The previous Rebbe explains that the Tzemach Tzedek wasn't asking what is Yechidus, what is Chasidus, because the Tzemach Tzedek knew that Chasidus is divine wisdom. It's a certain element of Torah, the innermost element of Torah. The question really was, what is the purpose of Torah, of Torah's Chasidus? What's the goal? So that's the way I asked the question originally in English. But if we were to translate the actual words of the Tzemach Tzedek would have, it's always, you lose something in translation, but the Tzemach Tzedek's question to the Alter Rebbe would have been, what is Chasidus? And the Alter Rebbe answered, Chasidus is to change the nature of one's character. And the Frierdiker Rebbe explains that obviously the Tzemach Tzedek is not asking what is Chasidus. He's not looking for an encyclopedic definition or a dictionary definition. He's asking, what's the purpose of it? What's the goal of it? And the answer was to change the nature of one's character. That means that Chasidus demands from anybody who's learning Chasidus to change the nature of his character. And Chasidus teaches us how to go about doing that. And of course, the answer is, Moyach shalit al halev. The mind has that much power over the heart that the mind's perception is capable to change the very nature of a person's interactions with the world. One time, the Chassid Reb Hillel Pevzner was in Yechidus by our Rebbe, and the Rebbe demanded from him to effect, to inspire, and to lead a community or the community of Hasidim. So Reb Hillel says to the Rebbe that by nature he's an introvert. He's a private person. He doesn't really like to be out in public. And therefore, it's probably not likely, like he's not really the person to have an effect on the public. And the Rebbe said to him, by nature, I am also a terrible introvert. That is a translation. The Rebbe didn't use those exact words, but that's the translation of the words. And if you think, the Rebbe is saying, I'm also a terrible introvert, and if you think I've already become so comfortable with my public persona that's already second nature to me, you'd be wrong. And the Rebbe said to him, you must know, or you should know, that by me, every public appearance is a new battle. Every time I have to appear in public, it's a new fight with myself. The Alter Rebbe, in the section of the 16th chapter that we learned today, the Alter Rebbe raises the subject of moyach shalit ala lev, how the mind can rule over the heart, and calls it not moyach shalit ala lev, how the mind rules over the heart. Instead, the Alter Rebbe calls it how Hashem gave extra light, extra power from himself to the divine soul that is in the mind, so that it can dominate and be and rule over and overpower the nature that comes from the left side of the heart. The elders among the Hasidim, who were the Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe, the very first group, they would review one of the Torahs that they heard from the Alter Rebbe when he returned from Mezrich. So who are these people? And when did the Alter Rebbe go to Mezrich? And when did he return from Mezrich? These people were students of the Alter Rebbe when the Alter Rebbe was officially a Magid, as a young man, in the city of Vitebsk, or in the city of Liozna, or in the city of Liozna, I think that's correct. As a young man, the Alter Rebbe already was known as such a brilliant Torah scholar and as such a pious person and such a holy person that many adults far older than the Alter Rebbe in age begged the Alter Rebbe that he should please be their guide in their avodas Hashem. From what I've learned, the Alter Rebbe would demand from them several things. If you want to be a student of the Alter Rebbe in those days, firstly, you had to give away your entire dowry. That means the money that your father-in-law set aside for you to be able to start a new life for you and your young wife. You have to give away your entire dowry to the project of resettling Jews away from the urban centers and off into agricultural communities. Because there, the Jewish people were able to earn a living. They were away from the government's watchful eye. It was a much better living situation for the Jewish people in those days. So that's firstly. The Alter Rebbe demanded, or in simple words, the Alter Rebbe demanded a huge amount of tzedakah on the part of his potential students right at the get-go. You had to give away the amount of your entire dowry to tzedakah. And only then would the Alter Rebbe consider you as a potential Talmud. The other thing you had to do is you had to be fluent in the Siddur, but obviously not the Siddur as in the prayers, but the explanations and the meditations of a Siddur composed by the Shaloh HaKadosh. It's a very involved, deep, profound Siddur with many great explanations and meditations. And if you wanted to consider if you wanted the Alter Rebbe to consider you as a potential candidate for his tutelage, for his mentorship, then you had to be fluent in that Siddur. The Alter Rebbe, at a certain point, realized that he needs to go and find himself a guide, because since he was a young lad learning with his father and learning with his teachers in Lubavitch, he had not had a spiritual guide. Very quickly, he outgrew his teachers, and nobody was guiding him in his life. And he felt that that was a tremendous gap in his development as a Jew. And so he went off to try to find a mentor. And he had heard of two potential mentors, two men great enough to be his Rebbe. He heard about the Vilna Gaon, the genius Rebbe Eliyahu Kramer, I think his name was, in Vilna. And he heard about Reb Dov Ber, I believe his name was Epstein. I'm looking it up right now. Who was a Maggid of Mezrich. Now the truth is, in those days they didn't have last names, so that's all nonsense. So I take it all back, even though there's a record of these things being their names, but I think it's all nonsense. The last names came into vogue maybe 4 generations later. As we know from the Alter Rebbe himself, the Alter Rebbe was called Reb Shneur Zalman Baruchov, and his son, the Mittler Rebbe, was called Reb Dov Ber Shneyuri, and then it was the Tzemach Tzedek who was called Shneur son finally. Anyway, the Alter Rebbe went off to find himself a Rebbe, and this is a famous story. The Alter Rebbe had two options. If I went to Vilna, he said to himself, they'll teach me how to learn Talmud. I know how to learn Talmud. And if I go to Mezrich, they will teach me how to daven, and davening I still don't know very much about. And so the Alter Rebbe decided he's going to Mezrich. He spent months there. It's a long journey, and you want to soak up as much as possible. And from what the Lubavitch historians can find, the Alter Rebbe made 2, maybe 3 trips to Mezrich in his lifetime. If I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I don't think so. It's such a long trip that you make the journey, you stay for a long time, you learn as much as you can, and then you go home. And you don't come back for many years. It's not like these days you hop on a train, a plane, and a bus, and you're by the Rebbe, and you can spend a weekend and then come home. It wasn't like that. So the Alter Rebbe went to Mezrich, and when he went to Mezrich, he came back afterwards with a new world view, with a new perspective on life and on Torah and on Yiddishkeit. And his Talmidim, of course, were waiting for him. His original Talmidim, the great Tzaddikim, who were the students of the Alter Rebbe during the lifetime of the Maggid of Mezrich. So when the Alter Rebbe came back from Mezrich to his righteous Talmidim, he would repeat, or he reviewed a teaching that he had heard from the Maggid, and those Talmidim took it so deeply, they took it so personally, they would repeat it so often. That Maimer, that teaching from the Maggid, explains at length that the entire Torah really, but especially Chasidus, you can only hear from a Oived. What's an Oived? Oived, by the way, if you say in Chabad circles, are you an Oived? They have no idea what you're talking about. Rather, you have to say it with a deep Russian accent. Are you an Aved? Are you a Maskil or an Aved? It's just, it's a accent. You have to have the right accent. So Torah, and especially Chassidus, you can only hear from an Aved. What is an Aved? One who toils to refine his character. And in the Maimer it says you have to be very careful to avoid false Chassidim. Or a, I don't know how to translate this correctly, or a Chassidic liar, a Chassidic charlatan, who says words of Chassidus, but he doesn't do any of the work of Chassidus on himself. The previous Rebbe added to this that Chassidim have to hear Chassidus only from a person who is doing the work. The work of Avodah. What is the work of Avodah for a Chassid? One who contemplates very long, one who meditates on the greatness of Hashem for great lengths of time. That's called davening. He spends a lot of effort reviewing his thought processes. One who spends a lot of effort reviewing his words and reviewing his behavior to make sure that they are according to Torah and according to what Chassidus demands. So, to such a person, you have to really pay attention and listen, and to really appreciate and embrace every word that they say. This is the work of the Oived, the Aved. The Oived is the one who fights to change his character, who fights to illuminate his character, to brighten it up and to lighten it up with the awareness that Torah provides and the awareness and the enlightenment that Hasidus provides. My friends, we will continue, God willing, next week on the same subject. This kind of meditation can be quite daunting, but don't worry, the Alter Rebbe has other options for us who are a little bit more average than this average human being. And in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll see you next week.